Picture the most powerful species on Earth deciding to rearrange its furniture. Not because the old arrangement was broken, not because it needed more space, but because an animal roughly the weight of a bowling ball looked mildly inconvenienced by the current setup. Chuckles. This happens in millions of homes every single day. Grown adults, people who manage budgets and negotiate contracts and raise children, quietly reorganize their lives around the unspoken preferences of a creature that cannot even reliably acknowledge their existence. Curious. And here is the question that should be keeping evolutionary biologists up at night. How exactly did we get here? There is a version of history that most of us absorbed somewhere in school, probably in a single sentence, sandwiched between agriculture and the Bronze Age. Humans domesticated cats. Cats came to our settlements, ate our pests, and we let them stay. Simple, useful, tidy. But the more carefully you examine that sentence, the stranger it becomes. Because domestication is a specific claim. It means humans took an animal and deliberately reshaped it, selectively bred it, modified its biology over generations to suit human purposes. And when you apply that definition to cats with any rigor, something unexpected happens. The story doesn't hold. To understand why, you need to know what happened on a Mediterranean island roughly 9,500 years ago. Archaeologists excavating a Neolithic burial site in Cyprus, a site called Chilurokambos, found something that stopped the dig in its tracks. Buried alongside a human with evident deliberate care was a cat. Not a skeleton thrown in haphazardly. A cat interred with apparent intentionality, positioned close to its human companion, both oriented in the same direction. This was 9,500 years ago. The site predates the earliest Egyptian cat imagery by more than 5,000 years. Whatever the relationship between humans and cats was becoming, it was already emotionally significant long before anyone painted it on a temple wall. Cyprus at that time had no native wildcats. The animal buried at Chilurokambos had been brought to the island by humans, which means someone, 9.5 millennia ago, made the active decision to transport a cat across open water. That is not tolerance of a pest controller. That is something more deliberate, more personal. It tells us that this relationship, whatever else it was never purely transactional. From the very beginning, there was something happening between humans and cats that exceeded utility. The question is, what exactly that something was, and which species was driving it? To answer that, you need to look at what happened genetically. Because genetics, unlike history, doesn't rely on interpretation. It leaves a record, and the genetic record of the domestic cat is one of the most surprising documents in all of evolutionary science. When researchers sequence the genome of a domestic cat and compare it to its wild ancestor, Felis sylvestris libica, a small wild cat still living today in the deserts of North Africa and the Middle East, what they find is almost nothing. The two animals are extraordinarily similar at the genomic level. More similar, in fact, than almost any other domesticated species and its wild progenitor. Compare that to dogs. Dogs diverged from wolves somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago, depending on which study you cite, and the genetic distance between a modern dog and a wolf is vast and measurable in hundreds of places across the genome. Dogs have fundamentally different social cognition than wolves. They read human facial expressions. They follow pointing gestures. They have been so thoroughly rebuilt by human selection that they are, in a real biological sense, a different animal than what they came from. When you look at a Labrador and a grey wolf, you are looking at the long-term consequences of intensive human management, a species that humans genuinely domesticated. Cats show almost none of that signature. The genetic differences that do exist between domestic cats and F.S. libica cluster in a handful of specific regions: genes associated with reduced fear response to novel stimuli, genes linked to modified reward circuitry, and genes associated with certain coat patterns, the piebald and tabby markings that appear in domestic populations and not in wild ones. That is essentially the full list. What it describes is not a species that humans reshaped. It describes a species that adjusted its own fear threshold just enough to tolerate human proximity, and then let human environments do the rest of the work. This distinction matters enormously, because what it tells us is that cats were never passive subjects in some human domestication project. They were agents. The cats that approached early agricultural settlements and found them productive, abundant prey, reliable warmth, reduced predator pressure were the cats that survived and reproduced. The cats that remained too fearful to tolerate human proximity left fewer offspring. Over generations, the population shifted, not because humans were selecting for tameness, but because the human environment itself was a selective pressure, and cats that could navigate it prospered. This is, in the language of evolutionary biology, self-domestication. The cat domesticated itself. Now consider the environment that made this possible. 12,000 years ago, the Fertile Crescent was undergoing one of the most consequential transitions in human history. Hunter-gatherer societies were slowly, messily becoming agricultural ones. People were settling, building permanent structures, storing food. And wherever humans stored grain in quantity, rodents appeared in numbers that a pre-agricultural landscape would never have supported. The concentration of prey that a Neolithic granary represented to a small predator was, quite literally, unprecedented in the history of that predator's world. Wildcats did not move toward humans because they were drawn to humans. They moved toward humans because humans had inadvertently created the most productive hunting ground those cats had ever encountered. The standard account frames this as a service. Cats killed rodents, and in exchange, humans provided protection and eventually food. But let's be precise about what was actually being exchanged. The cats were hunting rodents because hunting rodents is what cats do. They required no training, no management, no investment of human resources to motivate that behavior. The rodent control was a byproduct of cats pursuing their own evolutionary imperative in a target-rich environment. The humans, meanwhile, were not doing anything active at all. They were simply failing to drive the cats away. This is an important asymmetry. One party was doing something, the other party was merely not doing something, and the party doing something was the cat. This point comes into even sharper focus when you look at what happened next, because the relationship did not stay static. Over thousands of years, as cats became more embedded in human settlements, something began to change in how cats communicated, specifically, what adult cats chose to vocalize. In wildcat populations, adult-to-adult communication is almost entirely non-vocal. Wildcats use scent marking, body posture, and subtle facial signals. They are not meowing at each other. The meow, in its adult form, is vanishingly rare in wildcat social interaction. But domestic cats meow constantly, almost exclusively at humans. They do not meow at other cats with anything like the same frequency. The meow is, functionally, a human-targeted signal. Researcher Nicholas Nicastro at Cornell University spent years recording and analyzing cat vocalizations and found something striking. Humans consistently rate certain meow types as more urgent and more pleasant than others, and the meows cats produce in solicitation contexts, when they want food, attention, or access, are systematically different from the meows they produce in distress or aggression. They are tuned, in other words, tuned to produce a particular human response. And the evolutionary explanation is not mysterious. In an environment where vocalizing effectively to humans resulted in food and warmth and survival, the cats that vocalized more effectively left more offspring. Over generations, the meow became a precision instrument. Researchers at the University of Sussex, including Karen McComb, went further and identified what they called the solicitation purr. This is distinct from a regular purr. Most cat owners can recognize the difference intuitively, even if they can't articulate it. The solicitation purr embeds a higher frequency component within the familiar low rumble, a component that falls in a range humans process differently from ordinary sound. It shares acoustic properties with infant distress vocalizations. Human auditory systems, shaped by millions of years of selection to respond urgently to infant cries, register this embedded frequency as something that needs attention. The sound is simultaneously soothing and mildly insistent. It is very difficult to ignore, and cats deploy it specifically when they want something from their humans. This is where the story gets genuinely strange, because these are not behaviors that cats were taught. No one trained the domestic cat to embed infant cry frequencies in its vocalizations. These are behaviors that evolved, behaviors that the selective environment of human proximity shaped over thousands of feline generations into something that operates with unsettling precision on human psychology. The cat did not make a plan. Evolution does not make plans. But the result, regardless of the mechanism, is a small predator equipped with a communication toolkit specifically calibrated to activate the caregiving responses of a large primate. And the large primate, for the most part, has no idea this is happening. The slow blink is another piece of this toolkit. If you have lived with a cat, you know it. The slow, deliberate half-closing of the eyes that cats direct at humans they are comfortable with. Karen McComb's research at Sussex documented this systematically. Cats use the slow blink as an affiliative signal toward humans, and humans reliably respond to it with increased positive regard. More remarkably, humans who slow blink back at cats receive slow blinks in return, and both parties appear to experience this as a meaningful social exchange. The cat has found a way to speak directly to the human's social bonding system, bypassing language entirely, operating through a channel that humans experience as genuine intimacy. The slow blink feels real because, at the level of the neural systems it activates, it is real, even if the cat arrived at it through an evolutionary process rather than a conscious decision to connect. But the most physically consequential tool in this behavioral repertoire is not the meow or the slow blink. It is the purr itself, considered as a biological phenomenon rather than just a pleasant sound. The purr produces vibrations primarily in the frequency range of 25 to 150 Hz. This is not a random range. Research in therapeutic medicine, specifically in the field of vibroacoustic therapy, has documented that frequencies in this range have measurable effects on human tissue. The 25 to 50 Hz band in particular has been associated in clinical studies with improved bone density, accelerated healing of soft tissue injuries, and reduction of swelling and pain. These are not subtle effects. They are robust enough to be the basis of actual medical interventions. Now, the careful caveat here is important. Whether cat purring specifically delivers these therapeutic benefits to the humans it vibrates against has not been definitively established through controlled clinical trials. The extrapolation from vibroacoustic therapy research to cats are healing their owners is still a hypothesis, not a confirmed fact. But the physiological plausibility is real. A cat purring on a human body is delivering sustained low-frequency vibration directly to human tissue through physical contact, and the widespread, cross-cultural human experience of finding this sensation profoundly calming, more calming than other pleasant sounds, is at minimum consistent with some mechanism beyond simple acoustic pleasure. The cat, whatever its intentions, is doing something to the human nervous system, something measurable. Beyond the purr, the broader health literature on cat ownership is increasingly hard to dismiss. A 2008 study published in the Journal of Vascular and Interventional Neurology, which followed over 4,000 Americans for approximately a decade, found that current and former cat owners had a significantly lower risk of dying from heart attack, around 40% lower than people who had never owned cats. A 2009 paper found similar effects on stroke risk. Meta-analyses of human-animal interaction research consistently show measurable reductions in cortisol levels and blood pressure during and after human-cat contact. These are not self-reported wellness feelings. These are physiological measurements. Something about sustained cohabitation with cats is modifying human biology in ways that improve long-term health outcomes. The skeptical response to all of this is obvious. Correlation is not causation. Healthier people might be more likely to own cats, or cats might attract a certain personality type already predisposed to lower stress. These are legitimate methodological concerns, and the research acknowledges them, But what's notable is the direction of effect across so many different studies and populations. Cat ownership correlates with better cardiovascular outcomes, cat interaction correlates with lower cortisol, cat cohabitation correlates with longer post-cardiac event survival, and the proposed mechanism, reduced physiological stress through physical contact and the specific properties of the purr, is biologically plausible. The accounting between human and cat is turning out to be more reciprocal than a first glance suggests. The cat is providing something real. It is just providing it through a channel that modern humans don't think to put on the balance sheet. There is one more dimension to this picture that almost never appears in popular accounts of cats and humans, and it is perhaps the most unsettling of all. Toxoplasma gondii. This is a single-celled parasite with a life cycle that requires passage through a cat. Rodents are an intermediate host. Cats are the definitive host, the place where the parasite sexually reproduces. And the parasite, remarkable in its sophistication, has evolved the ability to alter rodent behavior in ways that increase the probability of the rodent being caught and eaten by a cat. Toxoplasma-infected rodents show measurably reduced fear of cat odor. Some studies suggest they are actually attracted to it. The parasite reshapes rodent neurology to serve the parasite's reproductive needs. Humans can be infected with toxoplasma. Globally, roughly a third of the human population carries it, making it one of the most widespread parasitic infections on Earth. In healthy adults with competent immune systems, infection is typically asymptomatic. But research by Jaroslav Fliger at Charles University in Prague, spanning decades, has documented subtle but consistent behavioral correlates of toxoplasma infection in humans. Infected individuals show measurable differences in reaction time, risk tolerance, and in some studies, subtle shifts in personality traits. The parasite does not appear to make humans attracted to cats specifically, but the question of whether a globally distributed cat parasite is quietly influencing human behavior and decision-making is one that deserves far more public attention than it receives. We are not just sharing our homes with cats. At a microbial level, a third of us are sharing our nervous systems with something that came from them. Set toxoplasma aside for a moment and return to the behavioral picture, because the behavioral evidence for what we might call reverse domestication, the modification of human behavior to serve feline interests, is strikingly concrete. Walk through a pet store and notice what occupies most of the floor space. Cat food in more varieties than most restaurant menus, scratching posts engineered from sisal and natural wood, multi-tiered climbing structures, cat trees that can stand taller than the humans who assemble them, heated orthopedic beds, automated self-cleaning litter systems, water fountains, because some cats prefer running water and humans have decided to accommodate this preference. The commercial infrastructure built around cat comfort in the 21st century is, by any reasonable measure, extraordinary. The global pet industry now exceeds $300 billion annually. Cats represent a massive and growing share of that figure. American cat owners alone spend billions each year on cat food, with a significant and growing portion of that spending going to premium and prescription diets, food of a quality that a substantial portion of the human population does not have reliable access to. Veterinary spending on cats has risen dramatically decade over decade, driven partly by advances in feline medicine and partly by the growing human willingness to pursue aggressive treatment for sick cats. People routinely spend thousands of dollars on chemotherapy, surgery, and specialist care for animals that have an average lifespan of 15 years. The economic behavior is not rational in any conventional sense. Something is overriding the normal human cost-benefit calculus, something powerful. That something, evolutionary psychologists argue, lives in a very old part of the human brain. The human species spent millions of years evolving parental care systems, neurological and hormonal machinery designed to ensure that infants receive sustained attention and resources despite the enormous cost of providing them. This system is triggered by specific physical and behavioral stimuli: large eyes relative to face size, rounded skulls, small noses, high-pitched vocalizations, and dependent behavior. the inability to meet one's own needs. These are the features that the developmental biologist Konrad Lorenz described in 1943 as Kindchenschema, or baby schema. And they activate human caregiving responses with a reliability that Lorenz called a releasing mechanism, a stimulus that unlocks a specific behavioral program. Domestic cats, particularly kittens, score exceptionally high on virtually every dimension of the baby schema. The large forward-facing eyes, the domed skull, the small flattened nose, the mewing vocalization in infant frequency ranges, the behavioral dependence on humans for food and shelter. When a human encounters a domestic cat, they are not encountering an adult predator. They are at the level of the perceptual systems that process these stimuli, encountering something that triggers the same neural cascade that an infant triggers. The caregiving response activates, resources flow, and the cat, entirely without strategic intent, benefits from machinery that evolution built for a completely different purpose. There is strong neuroimaging evidence for this mechanism. Studies using fMRI have shown that viewing images of cute animals, including cats, activates the nucleus accumbens, a brain region associated with reward processing and motivation. The same region activated by food, by social connection, and by monetary reward. Looking at a cute cat is, at the level of brain activation, rewarding in a way that is biologically similar to eating or connecting with another person, and the cat doesn't have to do anything to trigger this. Its face, shaped over thousands of generations of cohabitation with humans, does the work automatically. The comparison with dogs is, at this point, impossible to avoid, because it sharpens everything. The dog's story is genuinely one of human-driven domestication. Molecular evidence suggests that dogs diverged from a wolf population somewhere in Eurasia, probably between 15 and 40,000 years ago, and the genomic signature of that process is unmistakable. Humans selected for specific behavioral traits, reduced aggression toward humans, increased attentiveness to human social signals, and eventually, the remarkable capacity for interspecies communication that makes modern dogs so unusually suited to human partnership. Dogs follow pointing fingers. They look to human faces for guidance in uncertain situations. They form attachments that produce measurable physiological distress during separation. They are, in a very real sense, built for humans. But dogs, for all their social sophistication, do not set the terms of their human relationships. A dog that wants attention comes to the human. A dog that is uncomfortable with an interaction typically withdraws hesitantly or seeks human reassurance. A dog generally accommodates the human's schedule, the human's mood, the human's preferences for when and how interaction happens. The dog has been shaped to fit into human social structure. The cat has not. The cat determines when interaction occurs, at what intensity, in what location, and for how long. When the cat is finished, it leaves. When the cat wants company, it appears. The human, in most domestic arrangements, works around this schedule rather than imposing their own. The species that sets the terms of a relationship is, by any serious definition, the species with more power in that relationship. Ancient Egypt made this explicit in ways that modern culture has largely forgotten. The goddess Bastet, one of the most widely venerated deities in the Egyptian pantheon for over 2 millennia, was initially depicted as a lioness and later, specifically as the domestic cat, became more central to Egyptian life. As a cat or a woman with a cat's head, she was associated with protection, fertility, the home, and the pleasures of music and celebration. Killing a cat in ancient Egypt, even accidentally, was a capital offense. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described Egyptians running into burning buildings to save cats before their possessions. When a household cat died of natural causes, the family entered a period of formal mourning and shaved their eyebrows as a mark of grief. The cat was not a pet in ancient Egypt. It occupied a category that had no clean modern equivalent, something between a household member, a sacred animal, and a representative of divine forces. The spread of cats along ancient trade routes is itself a remarkable document of cat agency. A 2017 study published in Nature Ecology and Evolution, led by Eva Maria Geigel and her team at the Institut Jacques Monod in Paris, analyzed ancient cat DNA from archaeological sites across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, spanning nearly 10,000 years. What they found was a two-wave dispersal. Cats from the Fertile Crescent spread first through farming communities across the ancient Near East. Then, much later, cats spread again through seafaring and maritime trade routes, aboard ships, as pest controllers in cargo holds, and eventually as companions of traders and sailors across the Mediterranean and beyond. Cats did not spread because humans deliberately transported them as a managed population. They spread because they followed human infrastructure, granaries, ships, trade networks, and made themselves sufficiently useful and tolerable at each stop to be permitted to continue. The Norse provide a different but equally striking angle. The goddess Freya, one of the most powerful figures in the Norse cosmological tradition, associated with love, fertility, war, and death, traveled in a chariot pulled by cats. Curious, two giant cats, named Beigel and Trejagal in later tradition, served as her divine companions and transportation. Norse farmers left offerings of milk to Freya's cats in hopes of good harvests. Thoughtful. The practical Norwegian culture, deeply preoccupied with survival and utility, embedded cats into its highest theological architecture. Across cultural traditions that had no contact with each other, cats arrived at the same elevated status through some combination of their genuine utility and their uncanny capacity to make humans feel something unusual in their presence. The Prophet Muhammad's relationship with his cat Mu'ezzah, documented in Islamic tradition, produced the widespread affection for cats throughout Islamic culture that persists to this day. Islamic jurisprudence traditionally holds cats to be ritually clean animals, unlike dogs, which allows them to enter mosques, and the sight of community cats sleeping on prayer rugs in mosques across the Middle East and North Africa is a direct cultural inheritance of this medieval theological decision. In Istanbul, community cats are considered part of the city's identity, fed and cared for by thousands of residents. A cat named Glee lived in the Hagia Sophia for years and was known internationally, cared for by museum staff, photographed by visitors from every country on Earth. The city, with characteristic warmth, mourned her when she died in 2020. Across every cultural context where humans and cats have cohabited at scale, the same pattern emerges. Humans do not remain neutral. They are changed by the encounter. The internet era makes this pattern impossible to attribute to pre-modern irrationality or religious sentiment. When the World Wide Web went from a text-based academic tool to a visual medium in the mid-1990s, and humans were given, for the first time in history, a global platform with no editorial filter and unlimited space to share whatever they found genuinely compelling, one of the things they chose to share, in quantities that quickly became defining features of the new medium, was cats. Not because a corporation promoted cat content, not because an algorithm pushed it, because humans, given a blank canvas, reached for cats. The LOL cat phenomenon of the mid-2000s, the explosion of cat video channels in YouTube's earliest years, the emergence of specific cats, Grumpy Cat, Nyan Cat, Lil Bub, as genuine cultural figures with merchandise, media appearances, and global fan bases. The internet did not create the human fascination with cats. It revealed the depth of something that was already there. And the depth is real. When psychologist Laurie Kogan and colleagues surveyed cat owners about their relationships with their cats, they found that a substantial majority described their cats as family members rather than pets, a distinction that mattered deeply to the respondents. Many reported that their cat was one of their closest relationships. Many said they prioritize their cat's needs above their own in various specific situations, including sleep, home purchasing decisions, and relationship choices. There is documented evidence of people ending romantic relationships because a new partner did not get along with their cat, people declining job offers that would require relocating away from a cat, people choosing apartments based not on their own preferences for the space, but on whether the space would suit the cat. The behavioral modification is not subtle. It is thoroughgoing, and it operates at the level of major life decisions. None of this is meant as criticism. That distinction matters. The observation that cats have profoundly shaped human behavior, redirected human resources, and embedded themselves in human emotional and cultural life in ways that go far beyond any rational utilitarian accounting. This is not an argument that cat ownership is irrational or that people should resist it. The reciprocal benefits are real. The stress reduction is real. The cardiovascular effects are real. The emotional value of the relationship, whatever its evolutionary origins, is genuinely valuable. The point is more interesting than mere criticism. The point is that what happened between humans and cats over 10,000 years is something that our usual conceptual framework, the story of human mastery over the natural world, humans as the agents of domestication, animals as the subjects, almost entirely fails to describe.
What did happen? Something more like a negotiated arrangement, except that one party entered the negotiation with better information about the other's psychology than the other party had about itself. Cats came into proximity with humans carrying evolutionary adaptations, specific vocalizations, specific facial features, specific behavioral signals that interfaced with human psychological systems in ways that produced care, affection, and resource provision. Humans, entirely without awareness of the mechanism, experienced the result as genuine emotional connection. And over 10,000 years, both species changed as a result. Humans built an entire cultural and economic infrastructure around cat accommodation. Cats became animals capable of navigating human social environments in ways their wild relatives cannot. Which species got the better deal? This is, ultimately, the wrong question. Or rather, it is a question that assumes a transactional frame that the relationship itself refuses to honor. Domestic cats live longer than wild cats. They suffer less predation. They have access to veterinary care that extends and improves their lives. They are, by most measurable criteria, thriving. Humans, meanwhile, are less stressed, statistically healthier, and report some of their deepest emotional satisfactions from their relationships with cats. What began as a wildcat approaching a granary 10,000 years ago has become one of the most widespread interspecies bonds in history, stretching across every inhabited continent, embedded in the cultural DNA of virtually every civilization that has encountered it. There is something to sit with in that fact. Humans spent 10 millennia believing they were the ones in control of the arrangement. The ones who granted access, provided resources, permitted the relationship. And perhaps that is true in some narrow technical sense. The human can, after all, close the door. What the human rarely asks is why, given the option, they almost never do. Why the default across cultures and centuries and billions of individual households is to let the cat in and organize the space around it. The cat has never needed to force that outcome. It simply needed to be itself, in a way that made humans want to provide it. That is, when you look at it clearly, a more sophisticated achievement than anything that required force. It is the achievement of an animal that found, in the deep structure of another species' psychology, exactly the right key, and learned, over 10,000 years of silent collaboration, precisely how to turn it.